as you can see, Doris the Brompton and my S-bag have arrived safely. So I'm going to go and get my SIM card, and then after that get my train ticket to head through to Nijmegen. So yeah, being on the 11th floor of the Gastehuis, the guest house here in Nijmegen is absolutely wonderful. But that over there is the university building, the main building, the Erasmusgebouw, and Theology is on the 14th floor. There's some kids, there's been a hockey festival going on, and some kids training there for a soccer match. And on this side here is the Brackenstein forest. I haven't been for a cycle or a run through there yet, but I definitely want to get into that a little bit later today. But this is just such a beautiful city, Nijmegen. It's always so great to be here. So I went along to the library this morning. The sun was shining. The weather seems to change every few minutes. And when I went across, I went on my bike, and yeah, I went down and did some grocery shopping, and on the way back got caught in rain pretty much like this. It just blew in and soaked me through. Now, one of the things that I've come to Europe for is to speak at the Bonhoeffer Congress, which is taking place in Basel in Switzerland at the end of next week, and I have the privilege of delivering a paper there. You may know that I've done some research over the last 2 years. Particularly my interest has been in political theology, and one of the persons that I've used as an exemplar as someone who brought their faith to bear on their politics, not only formal politics, party politics or state politics, but also their polis, their way of formulating, arranging their lives in the world, is Nelson Mandela. I wrote the first ever, I think, full faith biography of Nelson Mandela. I'll stick a link to that in the show notes. It's called Nelson Mandela and the Methodists, Faith, Fact and Fallacy. And of course, it was necessary to write that. I was here in Nijmegen in December of 2013, 5th of December, if I remember correctly, when Mr. Mandela passed away. And at that stage, there were a tremendous number of questions about whether he was a Christian, whether he was a person of faith, and this was in the media, and no one had actually ever done a full faith biography. I suppose that might be the work of historians and theologians. So I got some funding in 2014 and undertook that task and wrote it up, particularly looking at Nelson Mandela's relationship with the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, of which he was a member. He was baptized in that church, confirmed in it, married. His marriages, all three of them were done in Methodist churches, and of course buried from that church. But the question that I wanted to know is, why was there such a strong claim upon him? Why did the church want to claim the legacy of Nelson Mandela? And from the other side, we also saw at that stage in 2014 that the governing party, the African National Congress, of which Nelson Mandela was a member, made strong claims on the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. So these two questions, why would the church claim his legacy, and why would a political party claim his relationship to a particular faith tradition or the church, were what really interested me. So the faith biography stuff is interesting in the paper. If you care to read it, you'll find how I look at the three Mandelas, the early Mandela from birth until he becomes politically conscious, more or less around the time where he leaves Fort Hare University. And during that period, he certainly was educated in Methodist mission schools. He grew up in a Methodist home, came under the influence of significant black South African Methodist leaders, and was even a Bible study leader together with Oliver Tambo at Wesley House at the University of Fort Hare. Then the second Mandela that we spoke about was the Nelson Mandela who became politically conscious, who skipped out of university, got involved in the African National Congress, and all the way up to the Rivonia trial, excuse me, in 1963. And during that period, the only real sort of links that we have are with some political figures like Robert Sobukwe, who was the founder of the PAC, who himself was a Methodist lay preacher, Seth Mokotimi, a significant black Methodist minister, the very first black president or bishop of the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, and then of course his marriage to Winnie Mandela that took place in a Methodist church. So it's that sort of anecdotal relationship with the church. It was also during that period, by the way, after he was jailed with the Rivonia Freedom Trial, that the period of chaplaincy began. So Methodist chaplains began to engage him. And in the paper I have some notes from various interviews with chaplains, but particularly the Reverend Professor Peter Story, who then was a young minister in Cape Town and was the chaplain to Robben Island, and who had both cared for Robert Sobukwe and Nelson Mandela. And there's some interesting stuff certainly during that time from Nelson Mandela's time imprisonment. For example, his celebration of the sacrament of Holy Communion, that he continued to keep that up. But also interestingly, the fact that Nelson Mandela sought to understand other faiths. He studied Islam while he was in prison. He always had with him a Bible and a service book from the Methodist Church, and he attended services when he was able to do so, and the chaplaincy continued. Now, the final period of Nelson Mandela's life, of the three periods that I dealt with, was post-imprisonment, presidency, and then eventually the elder statesman after he stepped down from being president. Now, in that period, Nelson Mandela had a much closer and more vocal relationship with the church, but in some senses that relationship was a little bit mediated. We can see that in the way in which he presents himself in public. But he was unequivocal about the fact that he was a member of the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, that he himself was a Christian, even though he believed in freedom of religion, which of course is a very important thing, and that's enshrined in the South African Constitution, that he himself was a Christian person, but that his identity need not negate the identity of others. And of course he had to be somewhat reserved about his personal faith convictions since he was a head of state. But I note in the paper that Mr. Mandela, when he was to be married, everyone thought that Archbishop Tutu, who is the best known cleric in South Africa and was an Anglican with whom he had a long-standing relationship. In fact, on the night of his release from prison in 2000, in 1990, 2000, that would be a bit late, 1990, he actually spent his first night in the Tutu homes. He had a long-standing relationship with him, but when he chose to get married, and I record this in the paper, he went to see Mvumi Dandala, who was then the presiding bishop of the Methodist Church, and he asked Mvumi Dandala where his membership was located, because you see, Nelson Mandela couldn't be a member of a church in the traditional Methodist sense. In the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, you belong to a local society or church, and your membership is kept in place by the fact that you partake in the sacrament of Holy Communion once every 3 months. Now, he certainly couldn't attend a local Methodist society when he was in prison, and certainly when he was president, it wasn't possible for him to become a member of a church. So what was decided was that his membership would be recorded in the Methodist Church where he was baptized in the Eastern Cape. And as a full member of the Methodist Church, I record this in the paper. This was from an interview with Mvumi Dandala. He was then married by Mvumi Dandala, the presiding bishop of the Methodist Church, to Graça Michelle. Actually, very interesting, that wedding took place the day before my ordination as a minister, and Nelson Mandela actually came to speak. That was the condition of Mvumi marrying him, was that the next day, the day after his wedding, first day of his honeymoon, he would come and speak at the Methodist conference in Durban, which he did, and that was a wonderful occasion. But certainly during that period, Nelson Mandela spoke very strongly of the role of the church in society, and of the support that he and his family and other comrades in the liberation struggle received from the churches, and in particular the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. And he spoke at many different Christian meetings, so you can find that information in the paper as well. Now, to come back to answering that question, why the Methodist Church was so keen to claim his legacy, and why the African National Congress was so keen to enforce the relationship that Nelson Mandela had with the church. Well, the reason why the Methodist Church was keen to claim his legacy is because he was a Methodist. I mean, it's a simple fact. But of course, there are also some sinister factors related to that. Very often we see that churches that are a fairly disempowered grouping in society might seek political or economic favor from persons who have that power in society. And certainly in the paper I name one or two very prominent Methodist ministers who've sought that political and economic favor by latching themselves onto prominent politicians. So not everything in that relationship was good. Of course, he should be claimed because he himself identified as a member of the church. But for what reasons do we claim him? That's a very important question to ask. The second thing is, why did the African National Congress play this part of him being such a committed Methodist? Well, I think there are two reasons for that. The one is that the Methodist Church of Southern Africa remains the largest mainline denomination with a predominance of black membership, and so a very influential constituency in the nation of South Africa. South Africa remains a deeply religious society, and about 83% of persons indicated in the last census that they're religiously affiliated. So that's a very significant constituency. The Global Values Survey has also shown that in South Africa, the church is the most trusted social institution. And so that particular relationship was one that the governing party, leading up to the elections from 2014 into 2015, wanted to play on, particularly because there were all these questions about the moral fiber of Jacob Zuma, the serving president. And they wanted to latch onto that image in order to gain a constituency. Now, of course, that's what politicians do. But there were some compromised relationships between the party and the church. I believe that 2/3 of the parliamentarians in South Africa, 65%, are Methodists. And we certainly can see that South Africa is very far from where it should be as a just Christian nation, or a nation that expresses Christian values. So those are some of the reasons. So perhaps just a little caution to say, let's be careful not to claim people for a particular religious tradition. And if we do, let's be very careful about our motives for doing so. And the second thing is to say, let's always be conscious of the relationship that exists between the church and the state, or the church and political parties. The church should be largely free from party political encumbrances so that it can adopt that role of service in the community, and at times be a critical and prophetic voice to speak against the frequent abuses of power of the state and even of big business. So this is not a lecture, it's just a thought, and if you really want to read the paper, I'll put a link in the description notes that has all of the information on Nelson Mandela. But this week I'll be speaking about Nelson Mandela and Dietrich Bonhoeffer in the framework of Christian humanism. So thanks for watching the vlog. I really appreciate it. I need to get back to work, and yeah, the weather is starting to clear up, so I may go for a run a little bit later. Please like the vlog if you enjoyed it. It helps to make it more visible. Share it, embed it, put it on your Facebook page, and please subscribe, and you'll be able to be notified of the vlogs as they're released. So thanks for watching.